Okay, following on from last week's perhaps rather dry but I hope informative video on seventh chords, I thought I'd do a fun and concise nice lick video for you this week. And the format is the same as always. I'm going to play for you a nice lick, then I'm going to break it down for you, and along the way we're going to get into a bit of theory and a bit of technique kind of stuff. And as usual, you've got the option of learning the entire lick note for note, or you might just want to learn part of the lick. And if you pay attention and if you understand what's going on behind the lick, then it's actually quite easy to come up with original variations and to make it your own. So let's get started. The lick goes like this. This lick is in the key of E. It works over an E major chord or an E7 chord. In fact, when I just played it, I played it in E, then I shifted it up to work over an A chord, and then I went back to E again. And there's the lick itself, and then there are some little connecting single note things which I'm going to show you as well. But the main basis of this lick is thirds played on the B and G string. So I think that will be a good place to start and just talk about the theory of thirds, because they're a really useful concept to use when you're coming up with licks and guitar parts in general, I think. So the basic idea is this: if we're in the key of E, you've got the notes from the E major scale. It's actually worth memorizing the notes in each of your major scales, and to know that in the key of E major you've got 4 sharps, and the notes in the E major scale are E, F sharp, G sharp, A, B, C sharp and D sharp. And then what we're going to do is we're going to lay out those notes along the length of the third string. So the E major scale on the third string, we've got an E note here, and the E major scale there, you can go below that E note down to this G sharp here. That's the lowest available note that you've got on this particular string. And then on the B string, we're also going to play notes from the E major scale, but they're going to be a third above the notes on the third string. So you can just think letters of your musical alphabet. So if we've got a G sharp here, you can go up 3, so G sharp, A and B. It gives you that pair of notes there, and then the next note is A, so A, B, C sharp. That's our third shape. And then we have this series of thirds, double stops along the length of these 2 strings, which goes like this. So it gives you a lovely melodic sound, and you can use all of those shapes to come up with licks or melodic ideas that are going to work over this E chord. So that sounds good, but one very common thing to do, particularly in a bluesy or countryish kind of context, is to use the flat 7 instead of the natural 7, and that's going to give you a slightly cooler sound. I think it's a little bit more bluesy sounding, and that's very easy to do. We've just played thirds there in the key of E major, and all you need to do is to flatten the 7th. So the 7th degree of the scale of E major is going to be D sharp. So if we make that a D natural, then you've got a very different sound, and you just have to find the double stops. Some of these double stops will actually remain the same, but the ones which have the D sharp in it, we're just going to flatten that and make it a D natural, and that gives you this sound. Because it's got that D in there, it's going to give you that E7 sound. I suppose technically this is Mixolydian mode that we're dealing with here, which is the E major scale with a flattened 7. You don't really need to think in those terms. You can just think about replacing those D sharps with Ds, and it gives you that slightly tougher 7th chord sound. Coming on to the lick itself, and that kicked off with this idea. So all based off of those Mixolydian thirds. So we're starting off up here with this shape here. This is an F sharp and an A, and we're actually bending that up. Very cool kind of country idea this. We're actually bending both of these notes up a tone. So we're getting that sound of these notes going up to here. So we're hitting chord tones. We're going up to the 3rd and the 5th of the E chord. And then we're coming down to this double stop here at the 9th fret. And then coming down again to the 7th fret. And then switching to this shape here, which is a C sharp and an E. And just moving that chromatically down. So notice with these thirds that you've got two different shapes here. You've got the major third shape, which is where the notes are on the same fret. Then you've got the minor third shape when the notes are 1 fret apart. So and I'm just adding in extra little note here. 7th fret, rather the 9th fret actually, on the 4th string. Sliding down, and I've also got this passing shape here, so those two shapes are the ones in the scale, but we can just fill in the gap between those with this little chromatic passing shape. So that's the first part of the lick. Then I've got this. And this has a very bluesy sound, so what I'm doing here is I'm bending the note at the 2nd fret on the 3rd string. I'm holding down the flat 7 here, this D, and then I'm coming down to the 1st fret on the 3rd string. So I've got the root note. So we're just playing around with this little tritone sound that really defines the sound of that E7 chord. As far as the picking hand technique goes here, I'm doing a kind of country style hybrid picking technique here. So that means that for the most part I'm playing the notes on the 2nd and 3rd strings with the middle finger and ring finger of my picking hand. So just kind of catching those notes with both of these fingers, pulling up on the strings slightly to get a bit of snap, and it also helps if you've got a little bit of fingernail on these hands as well to get a bit of bite to the sound. And then I'm using my pick for the notes on the 4th string. So you don't have to do that if you're not into this whole hybrid picking thing. I think you can play the whole thing with the pick. It just gives you a slightly different feeling. That sounds cool too, it just sounds a little bit different. Then what I did is just repeated that opening phrase. But I ended the lick differently, so just a pentatonic phrase here, so just E minor pentatonic. Ending on the major third there, and I think I did this. Just more tritones, just outlining that E7 sound. So is frets 6 and 7 on the D and G strings, moving that down and then back up again. Then what happened is I transposed the phrase to work over an A chord, and the way I think about this phrase is it's good to get your bearings by thinking about how the lick relates to chord shape. So if we're in the key of E, you might think about this 5th string root bar chord, and then you've got those double stops kind of coming out of that bar chord shape. So if we're moving to A, you've got your bar chord shape here. Then I'm going to put my 1st finger where the 3rd finger is, and so it's good, I think, to have these associations with common chord shapes. Then you're able to access these materials quickly, and you're going to be better able to use them in the heat of a real musical situation. So here we've got the same lick really. Exactly the same thing here. Sometimes I'm just throwing in some little ghost notes or passing notes. So with this one I might just hit the open A string. So that's our lick. Then I've got a little fill. So this is really just thinking around the A7 chord, little 6th interval. And 8-7-5 on the B. I'm sliding up to the 10th position. So you could think of that as major pentatonic. I'm really just thinking out of chord shapes here. Then we go back to E again. And I ended off the lick with this. So 6 here on the A and G strings. Hammering on from the minor to the major third. Coming down an E chord shape. I've got the flat 5 there, just pulling off from 1 to the open string. And then G to E to N. And for that kind of percussive, so chicken picking kind of sound, I'm often just muting the lower notes with the palm of my picking hand, and they're almost ghost notes. They don't have to be particularly clear, it's just a percussive thing. So that's the lick. Let me just put all of that together for you at a slow speed. The gear that I'm using today, guitar, is my Trent Model 1. I used this last week and a few people were asking for a bit more information about this guitar. I have done a full demo video of this guitar, so I'll actually put a link to that on screen so you can find out more. But it's a great guitar. And ordinarily with this kind of lick, I suppose it's a country-ish kind of lick, I would use my Telecaster, but my Telecaster is actually out of action at the moment. There's just a problem with the volume pot and it's crackling and not connecting properly. I haven't got around to getting that fixed yet. So I'm using the Trent, and the Trent actually works really well in this kind of situation. It has got Tele-like characteristics to it, I think. It's got a pair of P90s in here, but you can get that Tele-like twang and bite from these pickups as well. So it works. It's a really good substitute for that kind of Tele sound. The amp I'm using is my Fender Princeton, and people sometimes ask about my amp settings, but rarely is there anything particularly interesting to say about that. I mean, the volume's on 3, the bass and treble are somewhere in the middle around 5, so it's moderately loud in the room. And I'm not using any reverb from the amp today, but I will probably add a touch of probably plate reverb inside the computer when I mix the audio for this video. Using a couple of pedals, and since it's a country-ish thing, I quite like to use compression, so I've got a bit of that from the MXR Dynacomp, which is a script logo reissue of the 70s Dynacomp. And I'm also using the J Rocket Archer Overdrive. It's not an overdriven sound that I've got today, so I'm really just using that pedal just to warm up the sound a little bit. That's it for this video. Hope you enjoy learning this one. Tab, as ever, is going to be up on my Patreon page, where you can pay what you like, get access to the tab for this nice lick and most of the others as well. And I'll also probably write out those scales in thirds that I was talking about earlier. Thanks very much for watching. I will see you next time.